This adventurous story begins with some Transylvanian soldiers who were investigating inside a forest. Suddenly, one of the soldiers found a crown that belonged to their enemy nation. This was the moment when a great war was raging between Transylvania and the Turkish people. The soldier immediately took the Turkish soldier's crown and showed it to their prince, Vlad. When Vlad carefully examined the crown, he realized that some Turkish soldiers might be hiding nearby, possibly spying on them. Determined to uncover the truth, Vlad decided to go with some of his soldiers to the mountain from where a stream of water was flowing. That mountain was extremely dangerous and was called Black Tooth Mountain. No one preferred to go there after nightfall because it was rumored that a dangerous creature resided there. However, Vlad did not believe in such superstitions, so he led his soldiers straight toward the mountain. His priority was to eliminate his enemies at any cost and protect his kingdom. When Vlad and his soldiers reached the mountain, they discovered a cave. Strange noises were coming from inside, so they cautiously entered one by one. The soldiers carefully observed their surroundings, trying to determine the source of the sounds. But suddenly, something attacked one of the soldiers and killed him brutally. When Vlad stepped forward to investigate, he realized that a terrifying creature was inside the cave, mercilessly killing his soldiers. By now, the creature had already taken the lives of 3 of his men. Furious, Vlad confronted the beast and attempted to wound it with his sword. However, the creature was so powerful that it knocked the sword away. Realizing the danger, Vlad quickly retreated toward the cave entrance, where sunlight was shining in. As the monstrous creature advanced toward him, it suddenly stopped. It could not step into the light. Vlad then noticed that the blood of the creature, which had splattered onto his sword, started burning as soon as it touched the sunlight. This confirmed that the creature could not survive in the light. Without wasting any more time, Vlad quickly left the cave and returned to his kingdom. He had suffered a terrible attack and was seriously injured. While his wounds were being treated, he summoned a trusted advisor. Vlad told the advisor everything. He had personally witnessed a dangerous creature lurking on the mountain. The rumors were true. After explaining everything clearly, the man finally revealed the actual truth about the creature. He told Vlad that those creatures were called vampires, beings who had once been obsessed with obtaining demonic powers. They had indeed gained immense dark abilities, but along with that, they were cursed. The curse made it so that they could only survive in darkness, where they could use their powers freely. However, if they were ever exposed to light, they would perish instantly. It was at that moment that Vlad fully understood. The creature he had encountered was a vampire. That was why it couldn't step into the light. Vlad made up his mind. He would destroy the creature at all costs because it had mercilessly killed so many of his soldiers. Meanwhile, Vlad finally returned home after a long time and reunited with his wife, Mira, and his daughter, Igar. Mira was deeply worried when she noticed scratches and wounds all over Vlad's body. When she asked him about it, Vlad simply told her, "I was attacked by wolves, but I took care of them." Mira, concerned but trusting her husband, tended to his wounds with great care. However, no matter how much she tried to comfort him, Vlad couldn't get the monstrous creature out of his mind. It felt as if the vampire had left a lasting impact on him, almost as if it had taken control over him. But Vlad had no time to dwell on fear. He had to avenge the deaths of his brave soldiers. The arrival of Hamza. The next day, a soldier named Hamza arrived in Vlad's kingdom. He was furious because many of his own soldiers had been brutally slaughtered on the Dark Mountain. Hamza believed that it was Vlad and his men who had attacked and killed his soldiers. Seeking justice, Hamza demanded that the king provide him with more soldiers to replace those who had been lost. But Vlad firmly refused. He told Hamza that he had no idea what had happened and that he should take his gifts and leave the kingdom. However, Hamza was not a man to be easily dismissed. He was hot-headed and aggressive, and he was determined to rebuild his army at any cost. So, he decided to forcefully take some of Vlad's soldiers with him. Hamza's men captured several soldiers and started taking them away. But before they could leave, Vlad intervened. Vlad confronted Hamza and ordered him to leave immediately. For now, Hamza and his soldiers backed off, but the tension between them was far from over. Hamza left with a burning desire for revenge, and it was clear he would return to settle the score. After that moment, Vlad became deeply troubled. He realized that Hamza and his kingdom's army were massive. If they wanted, they could attack and take over everything. More than anything, Vlad was now worried about his family. He feared for the lives of his wife and son. Mira, his wife, made it clear to him. No matter what happens, our son, Igar, must not be harmed. The negotiation. The next day, Vlad went to meet Hamza and his allies because a peaceful agreement was crucial. If tension between the two kingdoms continued to rise, it could lead to war. And at this moment, Vlad was not in the mood for a battle. Vlad tried to reason with the enemy king, proposing that they should support each other instead of fighting. However, the enemy king had already made up his mind. He demanded 1,000 soldiers from Vlad's kingdom. His plan was to train them and strengthen his army so that he could eventually conquer the entire continent. Vlad, trying to keep things peaceful, remained calm. But then, the Turkish king made a shocking demand. He declared that among the 1,000 soldiers, Vlad's own son, Igor, must also be included. Vlad's rage. Upon hearing this, Vlad was consumed with rage. He would never allow his son to be taken away. Without wasting any time, Vlad rushed back to protect his wife and son. At that moment, several Turkish soldiers arrived to capture Igor, but Vlad slaughtered them mercilessly. The aftermath. Vlad knew one thing for certain: he would never allow his son or anyone from his kingdom to become a slave to the Turkish rulers. Even though he had killed all the Turkish soldiers who had come for Igor, a new problem arose. Some people in his kingdom feared the consequences. They warned him, "You've made a huge mistake. If Hamza finds out about this, he will surely launch an attack on us." This means that now their kingdom was in extreme danger. Vlad was desperate to save his sorrowful wife and his son at any cost while also protecting the kingdom. That's why he urged everyone to return to the kingdom. However, instead of going back, Vlad mounted his horse and rode straight toward the dark mountain. He saw only one way to fight against the enemy nations: by becoming powerful himself. Determined, Vlad somehow managed to enter the vampire's cave and stood before him, making a desperate request. He explained everything to the vampire: how the enemy kingdom was planning to attack and mercilessly kill everyone. Vlad did not want his people to suffer such a fate. Therefore, he wished to gain the powers of a vampire to become strong enough to protect his kingdom. It was then revealed that the vampire had been trying to free himself for years. He needed a brave human, someone willing to fight and die for others. Vlad seemed like the perfect candidate to help him break free. At first, the vampire tried to tempt Vlad, telling him that if he accepted the powers, he would gain immense strength, enough to defeat any army with ease. Excited by the promise of such power, Vlad agreed to become a vampire. The vampire then cut his hand, letting his blood drip to the ground. He explained that if Vlad drank it, he would transform completely into a new vampire. However, before Vlad did so, the vampire issued a warning: if he managed to control himself for 3 days, he would revert to his normal self on the 4th day. But if he failed, he would be permanently transformed into a vampire, while the old vampire would be freed. Vlad understood the risks but accepted the conditions without hesitation. His kingdom was in grave danger, and he was willing to do anything to save it. Without wasting time, he drank the vampire's blood. Slowly, his body started to transform as he began his journey into becoming a powerful vampire. As the vampire's power surged within him, Vlad found it increasingly difficult to control himself. His body underwent continuous changes, and in that very moment, he lost consciousness. After some time, Vlad's eyes opened, and he found himself deep within a dense forest. As he regained awareness, he noticed several extraordinary changes in his body. He was now able to run at an incredible speed, his stamina had become nearly limitless, and his strength had reached superhuman levels, so much so that he could shatter anything with a single strike. But what shocked him the most was his newfound ability to control a swarm of bats. With just a thought, he could command them to attack his enemies. Using this power, he discovered that he could fly through the air and leap onto the tallest trees with ease. These abilities astonished him, yet at the same time, they filled him with a sense of immense power. Without wasting any time, Vlad raced back to his kingdom at an unimaginable speed. But as he arrived, he was met with a terrifying sight: the massive Turkish army was advancing toward his land. Thousands of soldiers were marching forward, fully prepared to destroy the kingdom of Transylvania. Determined to protect his people, Vlad stood alone against the entire army. Unleashing his newfound vampire powers, he began his assault. With remarkable skill, he wielded a sword effortlessly, cutting down enemy soldiers one after another. He even used their own weapons against them, striking with lethal precision. Despite being surrounded by an overwhelming number of enemies, Vlad dominated the battlefield with his vampiric strength. The soldiers were utterly stunned. No matter how many attacked him at once, none could land a single blow. He moved with supernatural agility, dodging every strike and countering with devastating force. Before long, Vlad had single-handedly annihilated the entire enemy battalion. The battlefield was littered with the lifeless bodies of Turkish soldiers, yet Vlad himself had not suffered even a single scratch. As the people of his kingdom gathered around him, they were overjoyed but also confused. They had no idea who had defeated the invading army so effortlessly. When they looked to Vlad for answers, he simply declared, "No one will ask me anything. What matters now is that we are safe. We must prepare for what comes next." Meanwhile, far away, Emperor Hamza, the ruler of the Turkish forces, received the shocking news. His entire battalion, consisting of thousands of well-trained soldiers, had been completely wiped out. As the Turkish army launched its assault on Transylvania, Emperor Hamza was left in utter shock. He had never imagined that Vlad, with his comparatively small army, could have defeated his forces so effortlessly. The realization unsettled him. How was this possible? Determined to eradicate Vlad and claim Transylvania as his own, Hamza decided to send an even larger army, this time numbering in the hundreds of thousands. His goal was clear: to destroy Vlad completely and take control of the kingdom. Hamza was obsessed with becoming the ruler of the entire world, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his ambition. However, what awaited his soldiers was nothing short of a nightmare. Vlad, using his newfound vampire powers, had strung up the bodies of his fallen enemies in the most gruesome manner. The horrific sight struck fear deep into the hearts of Hamza's remaining soldiers. Even the bravest among them trembled in terror. Yet, despite their fear, Hamza and his massive army began their march toward Transylvania, determined to annihilate it. Meanwhile, within the kingdom, Vlad's wife, Mira, had finally learned the truth about what had happened to her husband. The revelation left her utterly shaken. She couldn't believe what he had done to himself. However, Vlad reassured her, telling her there was no need to worry, only 2 more days remained. If he could resist drinking human blood during this time, he would return to being a normal human again. To ensure this, Vlad made a crucial decision: he would stay away from all humans until the time had passed. He instructed his soldiers to take Mira and their child, along with a few trusted warriors, to a church where they would be safe from the approaching enemy forces. He promised that once the danger was over, he would join them there. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Mira reluctantly agreed and followed his orders. As the group set off toward the church, Vlad remained behind. Since it was daytime, he could not accompany them. Vampires could not survive under the sun. The journey continued as the sun slowly descended, and soon, nightfall arrived. Just as they were nearing the church, disaster struck. The enemy soldiers launched a brutal ambush, overwhelming Vlad's people with sheer numbers. His soldiers fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Mira and their child were now in grave danger, with no means of escape. But then, in the blink of an eye, Vlad made his dramatic entrance. He arrived with astonishing speed, faster than the human eye could follow. Without hesitation, he unleashed the full extent of his vampiric powers. Summoning a massive swarm of bats, he sent them hurtling toward the enemy soldiers. The bats attacked ferociously, tearing into flesh, devouring the enemy warriors where they stood. Vlad, moving like a shadow of death, struck down anyone who dared come near him. His supernatural speed, strength, and precision made him unstoppable. The battlefield turned into a scene of pure horror. No soldier could withstand his wrath. One by one, they all fell. The enemy screamed in terror as the relentless swarm of bats engulfed them, reducing them to nothing. Within moments, the ambush was completely crushed. Vlad had once again saved his family and people, but the war was far from over. The real battle against Hamza's massive army was still looming ahead. Vlad had wiped out the Turkish forces with terrifying ease. The few surviving soldiers, paralyzed with fear, fled for their lives. Day by day, Vlad was becoming more powerful, so much so that even those who had once been loyal to Hamza now questioned whether they could ever defeat him. When the terrified survivors returned to their king, they told him everything. They described how Vlad had commanded swarms of bats to attack, how his strength was beyond anything human, and how no warrior had been able to stand against him. The fear in their voices was unmistakable. Even Hamza's most battle-hardened soldiers were unwilling to face Vlad again. Hamza realized that unless he did something drastic, his army would never fight Vlad. He was beginning to understand that Vlad had obtained some form of dark power, something unnatural, something evil. If he wanted to win, he had to break Vlad's invincibility. To erase the fear from his soldiers' hearts, Hamza devised a cunning plan. He ordered his men to be blindfolded before battle. By preventing them from seeing Vlad, they would not be able to witness his terrifying abilities, nor would they recognize their opponent. If they didn't know they were fighting the demon, they would attack without hesitation. But Hamza wasn't relying on this trick alone. He planned something even more devious. He would keep Vlad occupied in battle while secretly sending a group of assassins to kidnap his wife and child. If they were captured, Hamza could use them as leverage, forcing Vlad to surrender without a fight. Meanwhile, back in Transylvania, Vlad tried to blend in with his people. However, some had begun to grow suspicious of him. A local priest, observing his strange behavior, came to a horrifying realization: Vlad was weakening in the sunlight. He always stayed in the shadows, avoiding daylight at all costs. Whispers of doubt spread through the kingdom. The very people Vlad had sworn to protect were now afraid of him. The fear grew into paranoia, and soon, they began to believe that their once great leader was, in fact, a demon. Determined to rid themselves of this supposed evil, the townspeople devised a cruel plan. One day, they lured Vlad into a large tent and suddenly exposed him to direct sunlight. Immediately, his skin began to burn, his body writhing in agony as flames licked at his flesh. Believing they had found a way to destroy him, the villagers continued to burn him, thinking they could finally be free of the monster in their midst. But Vlad was not so easily defeated. After enduring unbearable pain, he finally broke free. Emerging from the flames, his eyes burned with fury. The very people he had fought to protect had turned against him. In a rage, he roared at them, his voice echoing with supernatural wrath. What would he do next? Would he forgive them or punish them for their betrayal? One thing was certain, Vlad was no longer the same man they once knew. Vlad, filled with rage, turned to the people who had tried to burn him. He shouted that everything he had done, all the pain he had endured, all the sacrifices he had made, was for them. He had cursed himself to protect his kingdom, to save them from destruction. And yet, they had turned against him. His fury was uncontrollable. Anyone who spoke against him was met with swift death. His own people, the ones he had sworn to protect, had become his enemies. The moment was tense, thick with fear and regret, until Mira, his wife, arrived. Mira, understanding the pain Vlad carried, tried to calm him down. She knew he had given up his humanity for them. She knew this new existence was a curse he bore for their safety. Slowly, the people of the kingdom began to understand Vlad's sacrifice. But just as realization dawned upon them, a greater danger arrived. Hamza and his massive Turkish army had reached Transylvania. The sheer number of soldiers was overwhelming, far beyond what Transylvania could ever hope to match. When Vlad saw the approaching army, a rare moment of shock crossed his face. How could they possibly win against such an overwhelming force? Then, an idea struck him. Summoning every ounce of his dark power, Vlad called upon the bats. Hundreds, then thousands of them gathered, forming a massive, swirling storm of wings and teeth. He shaped them into a monstrous entity and sent them hurtling toward the enemy. The battlefield turned into chaos. The bats swarmed the Turkish soldiers, tearing them apart. The enemy army, terrified and confused, found themselves unable to fight back. The sheer number of bats overwhelmed them. Many soldiers were slaughtered, and those who weren't fled in terror. Vlad, seeing the chaos, joined the battle himself. He wielded weapons from fallen enemies and cut down anyone in his path. He was a force of nature, unstoppable, merciless. But in the midst of the bloodshed, he remained unaware of the treachery unfolding behind him. Hamza's special forces had infiltrated the castle. Moving in the shadows, they slaughtered Vlad's soldiers and made their way to his wife and child. Before anyone could stop them, they kidnapped Vlad's son. As a final act of cruelty, they threw Mira from the castle's highest tower. Her screams pierced the night. Vlad turned just in time to see her falling. In a desperate attempt to save her, he used his vampiric speed and power, racing toward her. He leaped, pushing his abilities to the limit, but he was too late. Mira crashed to the ground, her body broken. Vlad, his heart shattered, held her in his arms. Tears mixed with his rage as he saw the life slipping away from her. With her last breath, Mira spoke. "Drink my blood." Vlad recoiled, horrified. "If you do," she continued weakly, "your powers will be eternal. You will remain a vampire forever. And you must save our son." She knew what this meant. If Vlad accepted, he would never return to being human. But their child was in the enemy's hands. Without his full strength, Vlad might not be able to save him. Torn between love and duty, Vlad had to make a choice. Would he embrace the darkness forever to protect his son? After deep contemplation, Vlad finally made his decision. He did as his wife wished, he drank her blood. The moment her blood touched his lips, an irreversible transformation began. Vlad was no longer just a man cursed to be a vampire, he had now fully embraced the darkness. His power multiplied, reaching levels he had never imagined. At the same time, far away in the hidden cave, the ancient vampire who had once given Vlad his powers sensed the completion of their deal. With Vlad now fully turned, the elder vampire was free, no longer bound to his immortal prison. But Vlad had no time to think about that. Determined to turn the tide of battle, he returned to his fallen allies. Though they were dead, he had the power to bring them back, but not as humans. He slit his own wrist and let his cursed blood drip into their mouths. One by one, his fallen soldiers awoke, not as men, but as vampires. With a new army of the undead at his side, Vlad led a devastating assault. The battlefield was no longer just a place of war, it was a nightmare. His vampire soldiers tore through enemy ranks like beasts unleashed. No mortal could stand against them. But Vlad did more than just fight, he bent the very forces of nature to his will. He summoned thick, black clouds to cover the sky, blocking out the sun. Without the sunlight to weaken them, the vampires could fight at full strength. Vlad had become a force beyond human comprehension. He could have conquered the world if he wished. But he was not a tyrant. He was a king. His only goal was to protect his kingdom. With his vampire army, he annihilated the enemy forces. The battlefield became silent, littered with the bodies of those who had opposed him. And now, only one enemy remained, Hamza. Vlad stormed into Hamza's quarters, but the enemy ruler was prepared. The room was surrounded by silver coins, reflecting light in every direction. Silver was a vampire's weakness. It drained their strength, burned their skin, and sapped their power. The moment Vlad stepped inside, he felt his energy fading. But it didn't matter. A final battle began, Vlad versus Hamza. Both warriors were masters of the blade, their skills unmatched. The sound of clashing steel filled the chamber as they fought with relentless fury. Hamza managed to hold his ground for a while, but Vlad was faster, stronger, and far more ruthless. In the end, Hamza fell. With a swift, merciless strike, Vlad ended his reign. With their leader gone, the enemy forces were in complete disarray. The war was over. But Vlad's fight was not. As he stepped outside, victorious, he discovered a horrifying sight. His own vampire soldiers had turned on him. They had lost their humanity. With no enemies left to fight, they now hungered for something else, blood. And they had set their eyes on Vlad's son, Inger. Weak and helpless, the child was defenseless against them. Vlad stood between them, shielding his son. His own creations, the very soldiers he had revived, now threatened the one thing he had fought so hard to protect. The night was not over. The war had not truly ended. Vlad would have to make one final choice. Then he realized that it was his mistake. By converting so many soldiers into vampires, these vampires enjoyed killing other people. And now, they were after his son. As soon as one vampire tried to grab his son, Vlad killed him brutally. The rest of the enemy vampires were terrified and started backing away. Just then, a priest from a church arrived, showing them a cross, and said, "Give me your son, and I will protect him." Trusting him, Vlad sent Igor with them. But now, he had to make a tough decision. If these vampires kept growing like this, human life would become unbearable. Since Vlad had made this mistake, he had to correct it. Vlad then used his dark powers to turn day into night. But now, he started clearing the thick clouds with his power. As the full sunlight began to shine down, every vampire's body started burning. The unfortunate thing was that Vlad himself was among those vampires. His body, too, began to burn terribly. Igor couldn't stop his father because he had already chosen his destiny. Igor kept crying while all the vampires perished. Some time later, Igor was crowned the new king of Transylvania. From then on, he would make all the kingdom's decisions, rebuild his kingdom, and protect it in the future. We were then shown that the same priest approached Vlad, whose body had burned. But he poured a little of his own blood into Vlad's mouth. As soon as he did this, Vlad started breathing again and came back to life. And with this, our story comes to an end.